So today's guest is Marzieh Fadaee from Cohere for AI. Marzieh is a senior research scientist at Cohere. She holds a PhD from the Language Technology Lab at the University of Amsterdam, where she developed models to understand and utilize interesting phenomena in data. She has an undergraduate degree in computer engineering and a master's degree in artificial intelligence. So she was very, very early to all of this AI and language area. And today she's going to talk about AYA, which is an open science initiative to accelerate multilingual AI progress. So thank you very much for joining us, Marzieh.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me quickly share my screen and make sure everything is working as they should. Oh, can I just...
Yeah, that's perfect. Oh,
one
second. There we go.
Good.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. All right. So thanks, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk about this open science initiative on building a multilingual language model that we have started 8 months now. And I think, I don't know like how usually the format of these talks are, but I would suggest feel free if you have any questions or any comments. It can also be interactive, so you can interrupt me. We can also have some time in the end for questions. So yeah, in this project, we are working with languages other than English. And it's very maybe second nature to think about how or like maybe very, very intuitive to think that if we are like training these really powerful models that are capable of doing very interesting things on English, why not just make it also applicable to other languages? There's like the aspect of also having access to something like this in other languages, but there's also the aspect that languages can potentially help each other in the learnings of these models. So really what is limiting these models, I think is very true with this code, is the language, the data that we are using with these models. And by expanding that, our hope is that we can have nicer models, hopefully. So as you probably know, a lot of the current state-of-the-art models now, the big ones, the more powerful ones, they are primarily focused on English. So the main objective of those models are to really like benchmarking on English, like training on English data, but also like benchmarking on English evaluation sets and showcasing how well they do on English. Some of them, they do exhibit some multilingual capabilities. So if you see in some of these works, so for instance, in the GPT-4 paper, like online report, they do translate an evaluation set to multiple languages, and then they also evaluate on the translations to show some multilingual capabilities. Palm 2 also does that, Llama 2 to an extent. But they are always as like side effects. They're viewed as we have these models that are great, and they show something in other languages as well. And then we have the existing models that have been focused on being multilingual, which are not that many. So there's MT0 by Google and Bloomsy by Hugging Face in a big science project, which are really great and good starting points, but there are also a lot of things that haven't been done in this space. And there's good reason why not, because it is very challenging to work in a multilingual space. There are two main reasons. So one is really lack of data and lack of good quality data. So even for English, we still see a lot of research being done on how to filter our data, the training data, how to, if we are creating synthetic data, what is like a good way of creating a good quality data. So you can imagine for languages, and once we also go from high resource to low resource languages, it's going to be very challenging. And then the second reason is this phenomena, which is named the curse of multilinguality, which sometimes has been shown that by adding new languages to the model with the same capacity, so like same number of parameters, the model's performance would go down on other languages. So you do also need to increase, for instance, the number of parameters of the model to have the essentially have the space to learn for that extra language that you are adding. So it comes from like multilinguality, especially when you increase the number of languages, it comes from also scaling the model sizes as well, which is not an easy thing to do for everyone. So I do want to briefly talk about some phenomenon about the existing multilingual space. So I did mention how the Palm paper, for instance, they showed that they are capable of translating from a language to another, even though that was not the objective of the model. But for that case, it was actually later on another paper by Google that showed that there was this incidental bilingualism happening for Palm, where in the training data, actually, there were examples of parallel data, so like translations of the same sentence in those languages. So you do really need the data for these models to exhibit these kinds of bilingual or multilingual understandings. And like I also said earlier, they do benefit from each other. So if your model has the capacity to learn by adding new languages, it has been shown that in some cases cross-lingual transfer can happen. And if you add new instances in one language, the performance in another language can potentially go higher. So there are benefits of adding more languages and essentially languages sharing information in the latent space with each other. Another thing that I do want to mention on the importance of working on multilingual problems is that it's not only, it doesn't just affect people who speak that low resource or like particular non-English language. It can potentially also affect everyone who uses a model that is not really versed in a particular language. So there is this interesting work that they showed. So essentially, they created this data set in multiple languages to trigger the GPT-4 model to try to get it to generate harmful content. And it can be like toxic content, biased content, like there are a range of categories. And they showed that if the prompts are in a language which is considered high resource or mid resource, a lot of these attacks were not successful. But for the same prompts, if they translate it to a low resource language and then give that to the model would actually generate, in some cases, English harmful content, but also in some cases in that language or like some other language that was still harmful. So like the success rates for harmful content generation was quite high. So yeah, it does impact everyone who uses that particular model. And if we want to briefly just like remember again what we talk about when we talk about large language models, and especially the data that goes in different stages. So we have the pre-training phase where it's essentially we use billions and billions of tokens as raw data, unlabeled data, to train these models on the next token prediction objective. And then we have the instruction fine-tuning step where we take a pre-trained model and then we fine-tune it on a much smaller, but still in order of thousands of labeled examples, which are essentially questions and answers or instructions and answers, which is like how you would prompt a language model. And then the last step is the preference training, trying to add some subjectivity essentially into this training process to either avoid harmful generations or optimize for longer generations. Like there are different objectives that you can have. And for this, you also need label data and human annotation. So as we go forward, the complexity essentially of the data that you need and the resources that you need increases. So what we have for multilingual models, we already have raw data essentially, like on internet, for instance, Wikipedia pages in all of these different languages. The main problem to develop these multilingual language models is the instruction fine-tuning stage, because the label data in these sorts of pairs of prompt answers, they are not available in a lot of languages. And this is what we have targeted in the AYA project. So our goal for AYA was to create a multilingual language model and specifically trying to collect instruction style data by people in the community, anyone who would like to participate, and use that data to fine-tune a model that would hopefully do better for a lot of these languages that they don't really have any representation in existing language models. So this is a really large multi-institutional project where we started at Cohere for AI in collaboration with our colleagues at different companies and universities. And our contributors also come from all around the world. So that's really what I emphasize is important here and what we wanted, because we want for each language to have representations from people who speak that language. So in order to work on this project, essentially, this is also an ongoing project. We started by aiming to cover 101 languages. And there's a lot that goes into all of the coordination and the processing and like training and evaluation and everything. So here's just like some numbers about I don't think it's even up to date now, so it changes all the time. But it just to tells you how much effort and sweat and blood goes into this project. And our goal is to release this, both the data set that everyone is contributing for their languages, as well as the models that we fine-tune on this data set, hopefully in January next year. So yeah, I talked about data. So I want to break it down. There are different streams of data that we have in this project. So one is we started by doing augmentations by translating existing instruction style data sets in English. So here you see a list of existing data sets and their essentially the length of their prompt and completions. So we translated each of these data sets into 100 languages and added that to our training data. This helps us to have a more balanced representation per language. So you can imagine that before this, if you don't do some augmentations like this, we have probably billions of millions of examples for English, but then like thousands of examples maybe for like German, French, and then like hundreds for a lot of low resource languages, maybe 0 for a lot of languages. So really, in order to have a balanced data per language, this was important for us to represent all languages more or less to an extent equally. The problem here is that you are at the mercy of your translation qualities. So if your translation model, especially for some of these languages, it doesn't do well, then the data quality is not that great. And then there's also the problem of just like really not being culturally aware in the examples that you have, because a lot of the data sets are in English with the context and culture of English-speaking languages. A lot of the nuances of the other languages, it's not really represented there, and it's not going to be represented in the translation. So for instance, like recipes of like particular dishes that are for a region, like information about like authors and poets of a particular country, like these are probably not going to be represented in an English data set. So it's really important to, like I said, to have this input from the community. So people who speak these languages and belong to these communities, giving us their time to improve our data collection. So they did that in a few ways. So this is the Aya UI that we created. The aim was to try to have it really like simple and accessible. And how they can contribute is first by, we just show them examples in our data sets, and then they rate the quality of these prompt and completion. So these examples can come from, for instance, the translation process. So now we know how our translation looks like. This feedback that we collect, this helps us to very gradually to understand the quality of each of the data sets that we have in this collection. So this will hopefully then later on help us how we sample from each data set. So ideally you want probably like more samples from a good quality data sets rather than the ones that are getting a lot of thumbs down from users when they look at examples. The second way that they can contribute in the UI is to essentially having like a blank space and writing new examples. This is, I would say, maybe the most important part. So this is the place where people can really have, they can bring their experience, their background, and just like be creative and write pairs of prompts and completions in their own native language. And we have been collecting this for a few months now. It's also really interesting for me personally how this collaborative works. For instance, we started and then we saw a lot of the completions were just really short sentences, 1 word, 2 words. And then we really were interested in longer completions to train these models to essentially have like richer context for these models to fine tune on. And then in this collaboration of just like monthly meetings or weekly meetings and Discord channels, we communicated that. And we also see really the impact of that, that over time, the length of the completions went up. So it's really nice to have this sort of collaborative way of collecting data and improving in iterations what we see. So the current plan for Aya is that we pick the MT5 model, which is a multilingual pre-trained model. This model actually covers 101 languages, so that's where our language coverage comes from. And we essentially create this bucket of data, which includes existing instruction style data sets like XP3, our translation data sets, also another data set which we here is called like DALI plus ShareGPT. So we got that there is a instructions data set called DALI from Databricks. We translated that also in 100 languages. We also use the ShareGPT, the prompts in the ShareGPT dataset to then use the Cohere model to get generations and then translate that also to 100 languages. So really trying to diversify the types of data and types of, in terms of both like domain, the style, like all sorts of things in this bucket of data that we have for sampling and fine-tuning these models. So this is where we are now. So we have built this collection step by step. And what our aim is to do is and in the UI, people are still contributing and we are still collecting that. And we want to do that until December. So aiming to collect as many examples as we can in every language until December, and then use this AYA collection from the UI, add it to the rest of the data sets that we have, and then train the final AYA model. But for now, we do have these intermediate versions of AYA that we have trained on, like I said, on translated plus DALL-E ShareGPT dataset. And we already see really nice improvements. First thing we see is that we are generating longer answers, which is quite nice. So this is actually just the original example was in Turkish. I just translated it to English to make it more understandable what we have here. Yeah, this is something that we want. So a model that is speaking more naturally in languages other than English to answer questions. And then we also see that benchmarking with existing evaluation sets, we see quite nice improvements for when we compare to existing multilingual models. So we have this held out data set. Most of them are on natural language inference task. So we don't have any examples of this task in our data set, the AYA data set that we fine tune on. And we see that with so XP3, the blue bars would be our baseline. And then we have the AYA, the two versions of AYA. So AYA with everything plus DALL-E, and then plus ShareGPT on top of that. And we see very close performance. But one thing to keep in mind is that with the blue model, we only cover 46 languages, if I'm not mistaken. With AYA, we have 101 languages. So by adding a lot of these languages, we stay competitive on these tasks on the languages that they already exist in both data sets. And then we have also a set of in distribution generative tasks that we evaluate on. So these are tasks like translation. So the Flores is translation, summarization, question answering. And for these, we actually, both AYA models are doing quite well, but these are also like intermediate models. So we are hoping to, once we add the UI data, we see a quite nice improvement here as well. And then very quickly, I do want to mention that we also ran some ranking evaluations using GPT-4. So really getting the output of both the baseline, the MT5 XP3 model with AYA model, and see which one GPT-4 would prefer. And it was very clear that the AYA model was really a winner in this case. So we were already much better than the baseline. And now the rest of the path is to try to improve on what we have. So with the AYA version, AYA model version 1, and then adding the ShareGPT data set, like how it changes. And we see that for some languages, for instance, for Turkish, we see a huge improvements. For some languages, not so much. So this is also another way to get a signal of how we are doing and progressing with this model training. And one last thing is that we also do want to benchmark how we are doing on some responsible, essentially, tasks. So this can include, it is very difficult to find multilingual data sets. There are a few data sets out there. And we have been, so this is evaluating on toxicity classification task. And we are in the progress of evaluating on gender bias in translation as well as the adversarial benchmarking, which is just like a bunch of these triggering prompts and see how well our model does. It is important to know where we are before actually starting thinking about mitigations, especially when we talk about a lot of different languages. It's important to have a good sense of our performance in terms of how much harmful content, whether harmful content the model generates or not. And yeah, so for this, there's already, we already are at a relatively good place. So just like comparing with a large model like Palm, the Aya models are doing okay-ish in some languages, better in some others. And this is also, again, a work in progress with new versions of the model. Yeah, and I do want to wrap up by just, I really like what one of the Aya contributors said once, that how it is really essentially a project that a lot of people that are passionate about preserving their language have been just like really putting a lot of time and effort into this. And we are hopeful that by releasing this data and the models, a lot of these languages can benefit from this, and people can continue research using these resources in those languages. Right, so if I want to wrap up, the key takeaway is that data collection is really important, especially when we talk about multilingual models, because one of the main bottlenecks for a lot of the languages is data, good size and good quality. So it is also important to have, as much as you can, to have input from people who speak those languages in order to capture all of the complexities and nuances in that language. And we do believe that it's building multilingual models will eventually benefit all models, essentially. So a lot of the improvements have been happening in like machine translation field, or just because I think personally it's a very complex framework, and once you start addressing problems and issues in this framework, then most of the time you already have addressed it in a much simpler framework. So I think it's important to continue working on building multilingual models. And lastly, the project is still ongoing, so I'm not sure, maybe we can have a discussion afterwards. I'm not sure if anyone has already been participating or not here, but you can check out this the website here to get to know the project. And we have a very active Discord channel. If you speak, I would say if you speak any languages other than English, you are welcome. But for English also, we have been collecting data for English as well. But yeah, like it's really, give it a try, see what you think, and let us know also what you think. It's very much an ongoing project, so any feedback is also very welcome. Yeah, that's it for me. So these are just the core team of Aya. There are many more people trying to get it to where it is right now and get it to the finish line. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, very interesting talks. I really appreciate it, Marzieh. Thank you. I'll just stop recording and then we'll turn to some questions. I think first question will be Thomas from the chat. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. Lost my mouse. I'm trying to deal with two